Hello and welcome to the JCTR Corner. This is a program that we bring to you with the JCTR's area focus that are highlighted on the program. Unfortunately, you're joining us for the last episode of this year's Season 1, but be sure to catch us next year on Season 2 right here on Loyola TV. Now on the program today, I have the JCTR Program Manager who will be explaining to us and highlighting some of the topical issues that have arisen in the country. These stem from economic, social, and even some of the legislative issues that have made news and have had an impact on the Zambian people. Welcome to the program, Mr. Ndashe.
Thank you so much. It's my pleasure to be hosted on this program.
Yes, so as we have mentioned, you're giving us a rundown of the year 2019. How would you describe 2019?
Okay. Well, when we look at everything, I would say in 2019, I think there's been some positives as well as some negatives in different areas. You look at in the political arena, there have been some positives and some downside of things. Economically, there have been some strides that have been made, and also some negative sides of things. Socially, also I think it has got two sides.
Okay. So what are some of the major issues that have defined the year in terms of social, economic, and even legislative?
Okay. Quite a number of things. But I think broadly what we are seeing is that possibly as a country, I think we've struggled than we had actually anticipated. See, when government announced the 2019 budget, I think government thought they were going actually to ensure that the lives of ordinary Zambians would actually improve. But as we went through the year, I think we've realized that not so much actually has been achieved. Among the issues that have actually been so pertinent in 2019, one of the issues, topical issues, has been that of debt. I think we realized that government thought they were going to manage to run our economy by stabilizing debt. But because of the appetite to invest so much in infrastructure development, we see that, for example, the debt statistic or the debt levels have actually drastically actually increased. If we look at 2018, I think we are closing around a debt statistic of around $8 billion United States dollars. As we come to 2019, I think we are talking about a debt of about 10.5 billion kwacha. But that has been coupled with, I think, government, with the increased amount of debt, even the amount that government has been paying in terms of debt servicing has actually drastically increased. Okay. That has tended to erode a number of programs that government had planned, for example, to do in the area of, it could be in the area of social protection, investment in education, in health. In as much as we are appreciating that investment in infrastructure development is actually cardinal to spur economic development, but the direct impact is usually limited. So we see that I think government hoped that lives of ordinary people would improve. That hasn't been actually achieved. Government projected that, for example, the inflation rate was going to be kept between 6 and 8%. As we close the year, inflation rate has gone to around 10.8%, meaning the general prices of basic items have actually increased, which have had actually negative effect on the capacity of people to afford basic essentials. This situation has been actually happening in an environment where, for example, government has been struggling to create many jobs, particularly if we are talking about, if you look at Zambian population, largely it's the major part of it is largely youth, and you would have thought government would actually create more jobs. That hasn't been achieved. And then government has, due to the limited resources that they have run a budget that hasn't affected, for example, increment in salaries for public service workers. So we see that the cost of living has been increasing whilst general incomes of, for example, public service workers has actually remained static. So we see that struggling among the Zambian citizens would have actually increased. We thought possibly more would have happened. We never see, because of lack of proper planning on the part of government over the years. I mean, if we look through, for example, 2015, one of the challenges that we faced in 2015 was that of drought. That had actually so much huge impact in terms of on electricity generation. And government committed over the years that they were going to diversify in terms of energy generation. And I think even when we were getting to 2019, government emphasized that we are going to diversify the energy sector, and some money were allocated, but because of the high debt statistic, that hasn't actually been achieved. Then the 2018-2019 farming season was actually negatively affected by drought. We see that has tended to negatively affect energy generation, because we largely depend on hydropower generation. And now with the increased hours of load shedding, we see that the capacity of people to be economically productive has actually tended to be limited. People are working for few hours, and that has tended actually to limit like the capacities in terms of widening the incomes that they could earn. But that also is happening in an economy where the general prices have actually been increasing. So I think life generally hasn't been that good. Then possibly one issue that we shouldn't run away from when you analyze 2018, we also thought government would create, to achieve meaningful development, you need to create an enabling environment where you have peace. But we see that ultimate peace hasn't been achieved. We saw that there were some by-elections that would have come, that is on the political side, due to resignation of certain members of parliament, deaths of some councillors and some MPs. But as the country got to electing new members of parliament, we saw that I think there has been cases of political violence. That again, in an environment where there is political violence, there seems to be, the peace of the country seems to be threatened. You tend to negatively deter potential foreign investment. So we see that, I think generally, I think there are quite a number of factors that have negatively affected the economy. Of course, we are talking about the Zambian people have been saying we need to improve in the way that we govern ourselves. And one of the areas that they thought could be handled, if you have to thrive to ensure that people actively participate in the governance of the country, you need to ensure that you promote democracy. And to promote democracy, for example, one of the areas that you need to ensure that is put in place is to allow people to express themselves freely. But we see that the application of, for example, the Public Order Act hasn't been that impartial. So we see that I think there are quite a number of things that haven't been addressed. Of course, later in the year, there have been debates around trying to collect the lacunas in our 2016 constitution, and I think people were hoping that they would actually be involved in terms of inputting to the national constitutional process, But we saw that due to government not being sure of what possibly would come out of a widely consultative process, they bulldozed the process and moved in a way that possibly brought controversies. Not many citizens actually gave consent to the process that was proposed and spearheaded by government.
Okay, so now you've given us a very well-informed roundup of 2019 and some of the issues that have arisen in the year. One of the things that you've made mention to is the fact that we've suffered from a huge amount of debt servicing from our coffers, and that has translated into our economic situation right now. Would you say that the application of funds as a result of borrowing have not been prudently utilized in ensuring that they benefit the Zambian people?
Yeah, I think that's the ultimate conclusion you'd be making, looking at, for example, the many programs that government meant or planned to achieve. For example, diversify electricity generation. That hasn't been achieved. You are talking about, for example, programs such as the social cash transfer program, which is a social protection program that is meant to touch those people that are not directly benefiting from maybe economic growth. I think due to the high debt levels that government has accrued and the servicing that we are paying, I think people haven't been regularly receiving the amount that they are supposed to actually receive. And what we see, for example, in the reports like the Financial Center Intelligence report, the Auditor General's report, we see that public finance mismanagement has continued to be really an issue of concern. We also see that government has tended to have a strong appetite to invest in infrastructure development, and in infrastructure development, I think there has been so many outcries from many sectors of our economy that possibly the amount that on which the projects are being implemented, I think they are not worth what government is actually spending the money on. So we see that public finance mismanagement has actually continued. That is actually negatively impacting the growth of our economy, but also programs that government has planned to implement in 2019.
Okay, so you also mentioned about the fact that there's been a decline in people's economic capacities due to the load shedding that we have. Now, one of the projects that is implemented by the JCTR is the monitoring of the cost of living in the country. What has been the trend for 2019, and has it been affordable?
Okay. Yeah, I mean, we try to measure. I mean, you use the cost of living survey to try and measure whether government programs are responsive to the needs of the people. But saddening, as I've alluded to, due to the depreciation of the kwacha, the rise of the general rise in prices of many things, we see that actually the cost of living has actually drastically increased by around 1,000 kwacha. I think we began 2019 with a basket, the cost of living of around, for example, for Lusaka of 5,000 kwacha. We closed the year with a cost of living of about 6,500 kwacha. So meaning you are talking of an increment of 1,500. But this is an economy that hasn't been actually growing. Actually, it has actually been dwindling, going down. See, like in 2019, government projected that economic growth would be attained at 4%. But because of the issue of high debt servicing, long hours of load shedding, we see that productivity in many sectors actually has been hampered. It has been reduced. As we end 2019, government projected economic growth of 2%, which is actually not ideal, not suitable actually to actually deal with the high poverty statistic that Zambia has. We are talking of a poverty statistic of around 55%. That is according to the 2015 Living Condition Monitoring Survey. But when we look at the general increase in prices of basic things and incomes remaining static, actually what we should be concluding at this stage is that the number of people who are actually living in poverty has actually increased. It should be over actually 60%. So we see that generally the living conditions of the people have been actually been hard due to a number of factors. If you look at, for example, the southern part of the country, I think was strongly hit by drought. Most people never produced. So you see that the cost of living is actually increasing. The demand for maize meal is increasing. But here is a situation where people are not actually even more economically active, because the agriculture sector is not functioning, or is not responsive due to a number of factors like the high cost of production. So really we need, I think it calls for, with what we are seeing currently, and as we possibly look ahead, possibly we need to see how best we can prioritize in terms of which programs we implement if we have to ensure that the lives of the majority of the ordinary Zambians would actually improve.
Now, you've spoken about poverty levels of about 60 or above 60%, looking at the trajectory that we've been on from 2015. Now, before I come back to you and you just give us more information on that, we're going to take a short break, but be sure to join us on the other side.
To advertise on this program and enjoy amazing introductory rates, please call us on +260 211 290959 or +260 211 290912 or +260 953 538 000. Or send us an email at loyolazam@gmail.com.
Welcome back to the JCTR Corner. Now, if you're just joining us, we have on the program today Mr. Innocent Ndashe, who's giving us a rundown of the 2019 year that has been, and discussing with us some of the topical issues that have arisen in the country. Now, before we went to break, he was talking to us about some of the economic issues and the reasons why there's been some struggle in the country, particularly for the Zambian people. Now, you touched on the fact that the 2020 budget was given by the government, and then looking at the 2019 budget, how do you think the 2020 budget fares in terms of delivering for the people this coming year?
Yeah, well there are two sides when we look at the 2020 budget. If you compare it to 2019, government has maintained, for example, the sliding mineral royalty tax that they increased in 2019. So that means government will get a little bit more revenue from the mining sector. That is, if everything moves well in the sector, we stabilize, for example, electricity, power supply to the sector, and then possibly if the price of copper at the international market is faring very, very well, and productivity in that sector increases, we are likely to get actually more revenue, which is actually good, meaning government will reduce on heavily borrowing resources to finance development, which is pretty much okay. We also saw that, for example, within the health sector, government tried to make some adjustment to the allocation. To a few areas that possibly they intend to implement, which is most welcome. But when you interrogate the budget further, you see that possibly essential areas like allocation to drugs and medical supplies has steadily remained the same or low. So meaning that means most of the health facilities across the country, especially in rural areas, they will still continue to struggle to access drugs and a few other services that they need to afford good quality healthcare services. Then we also saw that government, I think, had, for example, an allocation. One of the challenges that Zambia currently faces is that over 40% of the population do not have access to clean and safe water. And government over the years has been making strides to try and rectify the problem. In 2018, in the 2018 budget, government had allocated 1.9 billion kwacha towards improving water supply. In the 2020 budget, government has allocated over 2.6 billion. So meaning there is actually hope that possibly the issue of water would be attended to. Mm-hmm. But on the negative side is that if you are looking at the poverty statistic in Zambia, the places that are largely affected by poverty levels would be rural areas, where we talk of a poverty statistic of 76.6%. And when you look at the allocation to the water supply, unfortunately, much of the rural areas will not be covered. The allocation has mainly been made for the urban and the peri-urban areas. Then we also saw that possibly government's desire in the 7th National Development Plan is to diversify the economy. And one of the areas that they thought has potential to deal with the issue of poverty, to ensure that we increase our exports, is the agriculture sector. In pronouncement, government committed to do something wonderful in the sector by diversifying the sector, moving away, for example, from just heavily maybe producing so much of maize, but diversifying to bring in other crops like cassava, sweet potatoes, and the like. But when we look at the actual allocation, for example, to one of the programs that is tailored to help the poor, that is the farmer import support program, we see that government has made an allocation of 1.1 billion kwacha. But most of these funds that have been allocated, about 60% of the funds, will actually go to promoting maize production. So meaning already you are talking about the issue of under malnutrition that is around 35% will not be dealt with. Exactly. Government has allocated about 40% to the e-voucher that is meant to ensure that crop diversification is actually diversified. That is very minimal. So we see that in pronouncements, possibly government has made very good intentions, but when it comes to actual allocations to programs that would have positive direct impact on lives of ordinary Zambians, I think it's not much. Possibly we need to, government needs to think through and see how best possibly we can generate more resources to ensure that some of the programs that are more cardinal, like the agriculture sector, you are talking of the irrigation programs, when you are talking about, for example, we are not so certain about rain-fed agriculture, so we need to be moving to water harvesting, enhancing irrigation. Possibly those areas need more investment, needs more government's attention than what has been allocated. So generally, when you look through that budget, then you'll be concluding that possibly the positives that would be actually achieved will actually be very minimal. One further issue that you might cite is, if you look at the urban population, a good number of people would be, for example, would be those that would be working in the public service. And if we are talking about the cost of living, for example, for Lusaka increasing to around 6,500 kwacha, government in the 2020 budget has decided to maintain the non-taxable income threshold at 3,300 kwacha, which is way actually way below the cost of living. We would have hoped that government would have possibly moved the non-taxable income threshold to around maybe 4,700. That is more at the national average. But of course, then if you want to be seen to be more of concern about the poverty levels in the country, government should have actually even enhanced implementing, for example, the sector-based minimum wages. Mm-hmm. Meaning then you'll be looking at which sectors are making more profits, and then you try to see how those then would contribute greatly to employees.
Okay. So moving away from the economic and social aspect of things, one of the other topical issues that has been in the National Forum has been regarding constitutional reform, and particularly what we call Bill 10. What are some of your thoughts on that, and what is your advice to the Zambian people and the politicians representing the people going forward?
Yeah. You see that with the constitution making process, and if you want to facilitate democracy, I think whatever you do needs to be of consensus. Mm-hmm. We already saw that people's submissions were that we needed more widely consultative process to be put in place, but government tended to just create something that was pushed in quickly through the national forum that was held in Lusaka. That didn't actually cater for many interest groups to participate in the process, and because of say the process wasn't more consultative, and say the way that the government pushed forward to move the constitutional process, we saw that, for example, the major opposition parties, for example, the United Party for National Development, boycotted the process. Mm-hmm. We saw that key stakeholders such as the three church mother bodies here, you'll be talking about the Zambia Conference of Catholic Bishops, and the Evangelical Fellowship of Zambia, and the Council of Churches in Zambia. They never participated in the process. You see, there had been a lot of fighting to say we need to create a platform that would be more consultative, where people, where people would actually agreed. Government put through that process, and unfortunately, they came up with a bill that they presented to the country. But again, even when you look through the content or the clauses in the different articles in the bill, again, that has been a point of contention. Mm-hmm. Because if we compare the bill to some of the articles that are actually in the 2016 Constitution, you actually see that the proposed bill is actually undoing some of the progressive articles in the 2016 Constitution. See, for example, we run a presidential system of governance, so meaning someone has to be elected president by the majority citizen, and we are talking about 50% plus one. We come to the bill, it's proposing a coalition government. And this is where, for example, two losers would just negotiate and form government. But that's not the desire of the Zambian people. Before the 2016 Constitution, the Zambian people rejected the position of deputy ministers. When you look through the Constitution Amendment Bill number 10, it's proposing to introduce the position of deputy ministers. But here is a situation where you are already struggling to manage your economy, you have high debt levels, resources are limited, but your government is again trying to broaden the size of government, which is actually uncalled for. Then we also see that due to this problem of debt, people have been proposing that we need Parliament to be having oversight whenever government is contracting debt through Parliament. Bill 10 is actually proposing that Parliament shouldn't be consulted whenever government is actually contracting debt. So we see that there are actually many weaknesses with Bill 10. And therefore, I mean, from my perspective, it's a bill that shouldn't be supported. From our end, as an institution, I think we were actually happy that when government took the bill to Parliament, a good number of members of Parliament, especially the opposition and a few independents, they walked out. So by because government feared that they didn't have the number to pass the bill into legislation, they have deferred it to 2010, and we hope that that same resistance will continue to ensure that the bill doesn't see itself into Parliament. Again, we need to begin the process.
Okay, so you've talked about the fact that the bill in and of itself is undoing some of the progressive reforms that have been made. How important is it that we cultivate a participatory citizenship in the country, but also as a government, we try and support citizen participation, particularly in governance and legislative processes? Yeah,
government needs to do a number of things. One of the things that you need to do is to create platforms that that promote citizen participation. Mm-hmm. Over the years, we've been talking about we need to ensure that we implement the decentralization policy. So that's one of the things that government needs to prioritize and implement, because with the decentralization policy, it facilitates for creation of structures at the lowest level for our communities, like at the village level, you're talking at the ward level, the constituency level, provincial level, and moving up. So meaning if you have such processes, then you are getting people to participate in processes.
In the development process.
Yeah, in the development processes. And we are talking, I think we've been lobbying over the years that, for example, the national budget process hasn't been that open. Not many people participate because there's no legal provision that facilitates citizens' participation. So government needs to ensure that, for example, they enact the Planning and Budgeting Act, then that brings into effect structures that are needed to ensure that people are able to participate at different levels of our society. Even when we come to the constitution making process, I think government needs to take its time. We shouldn't actually even rush as we move into 2016. See, even as we as we move into the 2020, as we are going towards the 2020. If government do not have adequate resources to ensure that they formulate a constitution where the majority of citizens participate, it might actually be good to postpone the process. The 2016 constitution is actually more adequate to deal with, to bring about harmony, to bring about actually peace than possibly what government is proposing through DO10.
Okay, so we are just winding up on our program. With everything that you've given us in regards to 2019, what are some of your quick recommendations for the future, especially that 2020 is coming and you also have 2021 just looming, and any recommendations that will have impact on the organization's economy? Okay.
Largely, there are quite a number of things that we need to do as a country moving forward. One of the things that we need to do is to ensure that we prioritize the scarce resources that we have and ensure that, for example, we diversify power generation. We need to move away from hydropower generation. I think we need to stabilize production in the country to ensure that if we have, say, more productivity in the mining sector, we are able to produce more, export more. Possibly that would help to actually stabilize the kwacha. We also hope that due to the realization that and government having witnessed what debt is able to do in terms of them implementing programs that have direct impact on the people, we hope that government will minimize in terms of external borrowing. Further, we also hope that government will try to be prudent and ensure that they prioritize sectors such as the agriculture sector. It could be manufacturing sector. See, we produce a lot of raw materials. By exporting raw materials, we don't actually get so much. We need to ensure that we invest adequately in manufacturing, so that if we're able to export most of the finished products, then we'll be able to attract more foreign exchange and stabilize our kwacha. But beyond that, what government would also be doing by, say, enhancing manufacturing, will actually be creating more jobs for our people.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for being on the program, Mr. Ndashe.
Thank you so much. It's been my pleasure to be hosted.
We've come to the end of our program. You have been listening to the JCTR's program manager, who's been giving us a rundown of 2019 and all the issues that were reigning on the national stage. Now be sure to join us next year for season 2 of the JCTR Corner. But for this year, we're saying goodbye and a Merry Christmas to you and Happy 2020. I'm your host, Alice Maplanga, and goodbye.